And now we present to you Thac0 with Advantage.
Welcome to Thac0 with Advantage. We're two friends that have been playing D&D a long time. We both love lots of other RPGs, but D&D is having us execute episode 66.
Hi, I'm Ange. I've been gaming for a very long time, multiple decades. I started with first edition and I haven't stopped yet. I've been writing for Gnome Stew for a decade now, and I run the Gnomecast, the Stew's podcast.
I'm Jared. You may recognize me from such online content as, oh no, this review is longer than the product it reviews. And, yes, really, I do have a point. I've got reviews and commentary about TTRPGs on Gnome Stew, as well as my own site, whatdoiknowjr.com.
After we look at the games we're running in our campaign journals, we'll be talking about how to harvest ideas for our campaigns, get out in the fields and toil and bring in that bounty. Then we'll have some recommendations of D&D related content for you to check out in our downtime research segment.
Now stand by for station identification. This is WDND the Role Player. Now we're going to McElroy McKinney and the Bardic College.
The 2024 Dungeon Master's Guide had a plethora of game-related material, but the current edition wasn't the first one to be in love with worksheets. In 1988, 1 year before the release of Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2nd Edition, the Dungeon Master's Design Kit by RPG legend Aaron Allston was released. This comprised 3 booklets: the Adventure Design Book, the Forms Book, and the Adventure Cookbook. These included random charts that would direct the readers to parts of the Adventure Cookbook, broadly describing things like villain plots and thematic encounters, and worksheets for planning out flowcharts for adventure developments. There was very little in the book that was mechanically specific, meaning it retained its usefulness as the new edition came out, and arguably still retains that usability. Now, if you use the copier at your first job in 1991 to make a ridiculous number of copies of each of the forms in this book, the statute of limitations for office supply theft should be up now. Not that I would know anything about that. I'm pretty sure Jared's talking about himself here. Good job, Jared. Good job, Jared. Way to avoid that jail time. Let me just finish up this campaign journal.
So, in my game, in the Old Margrave, we picked up at the ruined keep where they had just finished the battle with the Children of Briar and recovered the Briar Crown in the last session. They did a little bit of cleanup, did some healing, because they were really, really beat up. They also found some treasure hidden in the tower that the Children of Briar had been stealing from travelers and such. Some of my players started fixating on who these items belonged to and if they should try and find them to return them. And then Zartath's player finally piped up, or maybe it's just some treasure the GM put there for us to find. I don't want them to be murder hobos, and I don't think that's ever going to be a problem, but sometimes they do fixate on some of the smaller details that go in the other direction. When they finally got back to the Briar King and returned his crown, he asked if they were heroes and would be willing to do another good thing. He then handed them a whole bunch of coins that he obviously did not understand what they were. He just knew these were things that people called adventurers wanted. And it was quite a large sum of money for the characters from their perspective. And he told them that there was another lost soul in the forest, but how this girl could possibly maybe return to a life among people, unlike him. He told them that he could hear her song at dusk, accompanied by honeybees. Before they left, one of the players actually remembered the original mission that sent them into the forest in the first place, to find a few stalks of winter barberry, a plant that was about to fall out of season that a renowned alchemist in the city wanted some of. They asked the Briar King about it, and he's like, oh, I know that plant, and just made some grow for them, which they were all like, oh, that's easy. Of course, this group of players still has to turn molehills into mountains and spent a fair amount of time debating whether they needed to immediately go back to Zobek with the winter barberry, or if they could hold it, or if they should do some sort of magic to it to preserve it. And I'm just like, oh my God, can we please just get to the adventure? This was me starting them off on my modified Honey Queen adventure, which is, it's the adventure in the Old Margrave and the Tales of the Old Margrave adventure designed for second level. And I wasn't a fan of the hooks that were originally set up for it, because it was very monetary based, very, if you do that, somebody hires you to go get this stuff because they want money. And I'm like, I don't know that that's going to work for this one.
Mm-hmm.
Also, since they were already on the adventure for the Briar King, I was like, no, let's change this up a little bit, which is why I had the Briar King suggest they go, and that the focus was going to be on the rescue rather than the potential monetary gain they could get from finding stuff in this adventure. Now, they had a general idea of where to go, but not specifics, which thankfully they didn't fixate on for too long. Because sometimes they get, well, we don't know where to go. How are we going to do this? Just start walking through the woods. Just go. You'll get there. I promise. When they reached the river, they found an old woman resting her feet in the cool waters of the stream. And they were, of course, immediately suspicious. But when she asked for some food, they gave her some and started engaging with her in pleasant conversation, even to the point of Zartath using shocking grasp in the stream after she had removed her feet to catch some fish. This woman was Baba Magori, a powerful, wise woman of the forest. And she was, of course, testing them to see what type of people they were. And when they proved to be kind and pleasant for her, she gave them a cryptic message. You are kind souls. This explains why she finds some of you quite intriguing. You must head a bit more southeast, passing the low waterfall further up the stream. Remember, royalty should always be treated with respect. But when royalty strays from serving their subjects, they need to be corrected. When you find the honey cave, the name you need is Lila. And then she disappeared. Now, in this scene, Nevrim refused to get close and engage with her, even though she tried to call him over. So I mentioned to him that he felt a touch of disappointment from the forest around him. Now, he thought this old woman was going to be a trick from his demonic patron, who he had recently had a scene with the night before, where she sent him a message about being delighted about how their pact would be sealed in blood and stone soon, i.e. when he reaches 3rd level. So he assumed, since the woman was sitting on a stone, she was a trap. Zartath's player, of course, pointed out that there were going to be a lot of stones in the forest, so he might want to let that worry go, because otherwise you're going to be in trouble. After the old woman, they crossed the river, continued in the direction she said, and when it was getting close towards night, they heard some panicked voices ahead. They found a small cottage nestled in the woods where a bearfolk mother was worriedly looking up at her son high up in a tree, being threatened by giant spiders. I think the way the adventure is intended to be run is more of a skill challenge, but I actually just have this one be more of a combat encounter with the skill challenge of getting the boy out of the tree too. And I think that ended up being more fun for the players in the long run, because it had been a little while since they'd gotten to fling some spells and shoot some arrows. This whole scene ended up being a ton of fun, as I got to play both the panicked bearfolk boy, his mama, and a toddler bearfolk cub. Once they rescued the boy and dealt with the spiders, the mama offered to feed them, and they were like, well, we don't want to put you out. And she's like, I'm used to feeding many more. My older children and my husband are off in the woods hunting. I will feed you now. At which point she handed the toddler to Grish and went about, getting stuff. And I think the players had a lot of fun, interacting with the toddler, doing chores for her, fixing her thatched roof, chopping up some wood, gathering some vegetables from the garden, all this stuff, answering questions to a little boy with incessant questions about what it's like to be an adventurer. They had a good rest that night, and then they were off in the woods the next day, where they continued in the direction they were told. They got a little bit more information from Elsie, the bearfolk mama, but not anything more specific than they already had. But as they got further in that direction, they came across a young Alseed woman with an injured leg running from something large that was chasing her through the trees. An Alseed is basically a servitor, a half-human, half-deer, and they are actually a playable species in Tales of the Valiant Old Margreave book. And it turns out she was being chased by 3 ogres. Fight ensues. I don't know if my players picked up on this, but there was a theme to these encounters. They were maiden, mother, and crone. I don't know that they picked up on that. I don't want to have to point it out to them, but I do think it was kind of cute and a nice way for the scene to set up them getting led to the place they need to go.
Mm-hmm.
After the fight with the ogres, Faline, the Alseed, told them about the massive honeybee hive where the honey queen rules. She's never been there because she was told never to go, warned to stay away from the area. But she could tell them where it was and how to get there. So that's where we're going to pick up the next time.
So when I ran this, our Bearfolk Warden, which is... It is a 4th edition class that Robert Schwalb did a 5th edition version of. It is basically like the druid version of a paladin.
Yeah.
Our Bearfolk Warden ended up courting this woman and convincing her to move to the town with everyone else. They were collecting NPCs from every adventure throughout this thing.
I actually changed her name slightly from the book as written, because the book as written, her name is Fraulein. And I'm like, I took German. I'm not calling her maiden.
Yeah.
You know.
A little on the nose.
Yeah. I'm like, no, we'll just change it to Fraulein.
Yeah. I will say, I'm glad that you aren't completely skipping it, because it is an interesting take on a dungeon once you actually get there.
I actually have to do a little more development with the next part. It's going to be a month before we play again, because in 2 weeks from when we played, which is when we would normally play, I am going to be out of town at Buckeye Game Fest. And so we'll have time for me to actually focus on trying to make sure I understand. Like, I have the gist of everything that's going to happen next, but I need to, like, zhuzh it out a little bit to make sure it's going to work for them.
There is an NPC that you can ham it up with that is in the dungeon as well, if you throwing something for them to role play with and being ridiculous.
I have to figure out what his voice is going to be.
So I ran my Thursday night Midgard game and my Saturday Curse of Strahd game since the last time we recorded. In the Curse of Strahd game, we had 5 of 6 players, so there was a little bit more of a concentrated effort to explore the Amber Temple. They weren't quite as afraid they were going to trip over something that was going to murder them. They still were. They just figured that they have 5 instead of 3. It's more like, they might as well try and face their doom now. Every time they take a long rest in this campaign, I have been trying to write dreams for them. And the dreams are kind of meant to, like, flesh out things that they came up with in their origin stories, and then tie some of those things back to the overall plot. I've been having fun, and they've been having fun when they're not entirely creeped out by it. By that, I mean, it is, everyone is enjoying being creeped out. No one is telling me, please don't do this, because I would, if that were the case. One of the biggest hits was our haunted sorcerer, whose father was the cultist of Ozibus, that gave her the tattoo that lets her summon her specter familiar. She had a dream where she found out that, she remembered this kindly old man that worked for her father that was always, looking after her when her father wasn't around. And in her dream, she finds out that her father actually killed that man, and that is the specter that is bound to her tattoos that takes care of her.
Whoa.
Yes. However, he intentionally killed him so that he would take care of her. I also tied him into what went wrong in the Death House adventure originally, and why that ritual didn't happen the way it was supposed to. Because her father was actually trying to upset the cultists of Ozibus from the inside now that he was disillusioned with them.
Wow.
So we tied that a little bit into her origin. That was fun. In addition to their bad dreams, they got to exploring more of the Amber Temple, and we switched from using D&D Beyond's character sheets, which were getting a little confusing for them, especially our wizard. And these sections, you can look on my blog, I explain this a little bit more, but the wizard spellbook is a little confusing on D&D Beyond, which is kind of interesting for the official app, because there's a section where you learn or unlearn things, but it's just not really clear whether you're adding something to your spellbook or whether you are preparing a spell. And the weird thing is there's other classes that say prepare or unprepare, and the wizard is not one of them that says it that way. So it's kind of strange. So we switched. Originally, I just thought we were going to use the character sheets from Shard, because They are, I mean, there's a lot to them, but they scroll down. There's nothing where you have to click through to something else and then click through to something else to find something. They're just all there somewhere along the length of it.
Yeah, you don't have multiple tabs of stuff. It's just all one page, and usually stuff is such that you can click on it to get the full explanation of what that thing is, whether it's a class feature or a spell or an item or whatever.
The character sheets were really popular, but my players actually started looking at, and I have said this before, I run off of my laptop. So I actually have a VTT up when I am running the game, and I'm referencing all the encounters through there. They realized they could, on their phones, they were able to see the map and move their tokens around, and it was working fine for them. So now they are super excited about doing things that way, even though we all said, when we get to Castle Ravenloft, I am breaking out that set of Castle Ravenloft maps that I have.
You are still breaking out that set of Castle Ravenloft maps.
Those were coming out one way or the other. But it was really neat, and it really worked very well for them. Like, just on their smartphones, they were able to move around and bounce back and forth between the map and their character sheet. So it was pretty cool. I'm kind of looking forward to this.
Yeah. Shard is pretty low resource as far as a VTT goes. I have one of my players spends summer weekends, it's starting next month, at camp, and where he has an RV that's got water, power, sewage, all this stuff. But he's there on weekends. So when we play on Saturdays, he just logs on from there. And the biggest problem we used to have when we were using Roll20 or other VTTs was his computer just didn't have the bandwidth for it. Now our biggest problem is when the Wi-Fi of the campsite is being spotty. So sometimes he has to drop his video, but the VTT itself is always fine.
Yeah, it worked really well. Everybody was very, very into that once we got everything up and running. On our Thursday night side of things, we had our adventurers decided they were going to go into the Elven Vault to find the Dragon Slaying Spear. Before they left, they found out they have a human cleric that is trying to get them to help her to piece together a ritual so that the Sultana can make Dragonborn like Marat, the founder of the Empire, did in the old days, which is where Dragonborn come from originally. And they also noticed that one of the kobold nobles that kind of looked rather assassin-y was sneaking around and spying on her. So they're getting an idea that there might be some intrigue within the Sultana's court in exile here.
I think we disappointed her because we were very much like, you should probably talk to the Sultana before pursuing this quest.
Not to give too much away, but she was very much wanting to present it to her as a completed thing so that it was more tempting for her to just accept and use the ritual.
She wanted to ask forgiveness rather than permission.
Yes, that is exactly it. So once the PCs got to the Elven Vault, first they had a riddle that was in Elvish. It was not a super deep riddle. It was just basically a lot of it was, hey, you speak Elvish, you can make a history check, and you can pretty much piece together, this is what you need to say to get the vault open. But I like throwing at least the texture of that into an adventure here and there. Inside the vault, they started hearing like the phantom voice of the elf that was the Forge Master, kind of intimating that there was some internal strife amongst the elves, and they were getting an idea that maybe the final days of this vault weren't great. And
maybe that the elf that was in charge was a little bit of a racist.
Yes. It turns out he's not particularly fond of human beings, no. They also found the training room, which had a bunch of constructs in it. You can probably guess the constructs activated.
It was a fight.
It was a big fight. What's funny is there were 4 constructs. 1 was large, 3 were medium-sized. 2 of them looked like they were like climbing the walls, assassin type, fast little things. And the other one looks like this giant tank with a great sword. And there was one in the back that was like analyzing everything that they were doing and calling out orders to people as he was analyzing what they were doing. And they referred to him as the nerd. And he was shooting like he would reconfigure his arms to be weapons. So he reconfigured his arm to be a crossbow, and he was just kind of shooting at them for a little bit while he was calling out orders to the other ones. Once Marin and Karatatup got close to him, he reconfigured his arms into 4-bladed weapons. At which point, those 4-bladed weapons went into Karatatup. And he was making death saves. I think my favorite thing, though, was when Eileen when I described the arms reconfiguring, and she goes, General Kenobi.
Yep.
So, turns out the nerd was kind of probably the most dangerous of all of the constructs that were in there. Karatotep didn't die, Marin didn't die, Kazina didn't die. All three of them were close at some point in this fight. Ivy almost engaged in melee combat, which is terrifying for her.
She's squishy.
Yes. And we got to see Karatotep turn into a giant ape, which is his latest polymorph form that he has been trying out. It was very scary stuff because there's a cosmic balance to these things, though. 2 of these constructs were actually short-circuited by psychic damage, so therefore I have paid you back for having psychic-resistant monsters in the game.
I liked when Karatotep, as the giant ape, picked up 2 of
Yes.
the 2 of the constructs and started smashing them together like they were action figures.
It was very fun. Unfortunately, we have a month in between games just because of scheduling, and then we will pick up with the vault exploration then.
Because again, Ange is going to Buckeye Game Fest. Therefore, I'm not available on the Thursday we would play. I believe that Brandon and Eileen also have a thing they're doing that night too. So
The greatest villain of any D&D campaign scheduling.
it is. It really is.
Welcome to the Dungeon Master's Workshop.
Running a campaign can sometimes be a juggling act. There's what we have planned, and then there's what happens at the table. Sometimes we struggle to come up with what to do next. Other times we have great ideas, but we don't capture them before they fade from memory. Or maybe we have a brilliant idea, but we can't quite figure out how to work that into our campaign. Today we're going to look at capturing and managing these ideas for your campaigns. So Ange, have you ever had a really great idea, but you could never quite work it into the campaign before it ended?
Yes, but I've forgotten most of them. My original Eberron campaign, I had a bunch of big ideas for where the campaign was going that we never got to because the scope of what I was thinking of was beyond where we were in the campaign.
Mm-hmm.
This was my first campaign where I was taking planning very seriously, and I had a lot of end game ideas for what was going to happen, and we only got about halfway through what I was expecting to do with the campaign. There was a lot of stuff I never really got to.
One of the ones that jumps out in my head is I had this big plan for villains in one of my campaigns. Because they were wizards, they were taking people to the demi-plane of time where they could speed up their training. So all of a sudden there was going to be all of these people that were highly trained and dangerous that the PCs had to deal with, and they were going to have to figure out how do they keep having this many people that are this accomplished just showing up left and right because, they don't have that many recruits. And as it turned out, I couldn't work it in other than it was the backstory of one character that had disappeared and came back and looked like she was 10 years older, and she was basically an archmage.
Yeah.
I got to work it in a little bit, but not to the extent that it felt like it mattered that much. So what do you think is the most challenging thing between having the idea and making it work in the game?
The players. No, more seriously, we have a plan, we prep, we have ideas of what's going to happen in the game. All of that changes the moment you give it to the players.
Mm-hmm.
You don't know, and you shouldn't know, what the players are going to do. You need to be able to adapt and be agile to adjust to the things the players are going to do in the game. And sometimes that means you may have an idea that's really good, but if it's not going to jive with the direction the players are taking things, sometimes that can be really disappointing.
It's really funny because as you're mentioning that, I was thinking, on one hand, the players can make these things difficult. On the other hand, the players are the source of so many good ideas that you have to put into the campaign. And it reminded me of that one thing in The Simpsons when Homer is talking about how alcohol is the cause of and solution to all of life's problems. That's player characters.
Yeah.
For me, sometimes it's almost worse to have an idea about a very similar story to the one that you're running, because it's almost like they butt heads, like they should go together, but they don't.
This is why I run one-shots. Seriously, this is why I enjoy running one-shots at conventions, because I will come up with the one-shot with the PCs for that game and how those PCs fit into the story, what the story of the one-shot is, And then it's all, what do the players do with it?
Mhm.
I love seeing what different groups of players do with the same setup.
Yeah.
And I can do that in a one-shot because that's what the one-shot is designed for.
Mm-hmm.
And as long as I know the opening and kind of what I expect the finale to be, I don't care how the players get there.
Yeah.
You know, I'll usually have ideas for things I want to have happen, but it's however the players engage with it. With a campaign, it's a little different. It's still very dependent upon what the players do, how the players engage with the content I'm putting in front of them, but I don't necessarily get to see how it would have gone in another iteration of the game.
So I do not advocate anyone use this as a solution because this was a terrible idea, even though it kind of worked out fairly well. Jared was very tired when he was doing this. I had this issue with a Star Wars game that I was running. I'm sorry, we're a D&D podcast, but I can't help it. It's Star Wars. That pops into my head a lot.
We are polygamerists.
Exactly.
We play a lot of games. D&D does not need to sit in a silo by itself. It can be influenced by other games and influence other games. It's okay that we talk about superheroes and Star Wars and other games.
And Star Wars is absolutely relevant to fantasy games. So, but I had these ideas that would have worked really well for some of the NPCs that I made for this campaign, but they didn't seem like they would fit for that group of player characters. And I had all these ideas of like the NPCs' backstories, but I didn't want that to overshadow any of the players. So what we ended up happening, we had two groups. One would be the one I was running for on one Thursday. The other was the group that I was running for on the other Thursday. And all of those plots that didn't fit with one group usually fit with the other group. So I am juggling back and forth between these two and updating things that are going on with different NPCs based on when this group did something and when this group did something. And I'm tracking like whether this group is still 2 weeks behind this group. It actually worked really well. And also I am surprised that my brain did not melt and fall out of my ears. It was great. And I will never, ever try and do that again.
Yeah, that sounds brilliant. Be gentle with yourself. Don't do that again.
And the other thing is I've had some ideas for like master villains that would be great to work in and even work in the theme of the campaign, but there's already another villain that I've been foreshadowing. It would kind of short circuit that one, and I would rather do the slow build on the one that I already have kind of tied into the campaign than drop this one in and erase some of what I did with that other villain.
Yeah.
So when do you have your most creative ideas?
When it's absolutely inconvenient and I don't have anything to write it down with.
Mm-hmm.
I have seriously before been in bed, lights are out, I've put down my device, everything is dark, I've got the fan on, I've got my sleep mask on, I am trying to go to sleep, and then an idea hits me. And I'm like, shit! And I have to grab the phone, pull off the eye mask, open a note app and write it down, because if I don't, when I wake up the next morning, I will be like, that was a really good idea. I don't remember any of it.
I've had the situation where I have an idea like that and I cannot get to sleep. So I have to get out of bed, walk over to my office, open up a document and write out everything that I was thinking before I can ever get back to sleep again.
It's pretty bad when I'm on like a road trip and I'm the one driving and I get the idea. And then it's like, oh man, crap. If I were more astute with my technology, I would just hit record and start talking about it. But I've never been quite that on the ball with that type of thing.
I tried at one point in time, and this may work for other people, but I tried to do the whole, like, I'm just going to turn on a voice recording and talk about this thing. And it's like, I don't like listening to myself that much. The only time I like listening to myself is if I'm talking to Ange. But it just wasn't, capturing exactly what I wanted to. And I felt kind of self-conscious talking into this thing. So it was not a good way for me to capture ideas. I noticed that I will have a lot of ideas for one genre when I'm watching a different one. And it's, yeah, like if I am watching a heist movie, I will start thinking, you could do this in a fantasy campaign. Especially me personally, there are other Zack Snyder movies I do not like. I really liked Army of the Dead, and the idea of going into an undead city to try and raid a vault basically not just, not just a dungeon, but specifically like this vault where you know that there was money located and that's the only thing you're going in for. You're not exploring the city. You're not exploring a dungeon. You're going to that particular vault to crack it open and then get out before all of the undead eat you. I really like that one, and I'm sitting here drawing up how would I do this in D&D? How would I make it actually fun to try and crack a safe in D&D where it's not just one thieves tool check or
one skill roll.
So yeah, I have a lot of those where it's like this is a completely different genre and my brain wants to force it into D&D.
Now, I will say in relation to campaign planning, I generally only come up with the broad overview of what I want to do with the campaign, like the scope of how the characters need to fit into things. Like when I did the old Margrave one, you need to be a character that's willing to go into the forest. I'm connecting you to another PC, build your background based off of that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't start coming up with the really cool ideas for the campaign until I know who those characters are going to be.
I agree, because that is a lot of what's been going on in my Ravenloft game. The more I see the players and how they're playing their characters and how they react to other NPCs, the more I get ideas for like giving them terrible dreams and figuring out which NPCs are really going to get under their skin. And yeah, until you see them in motion, you don't see that as often. You don't get those sparks of imagination.
Yeah, with the Zendrick game, I wanted to have the characters go to Zendrick, so I set up this idea of the reality show competition to gain a spot on the expedition to go to Zendrick. Nothing else was really put into place until I started knowing who these characters were going to be. I ended up with a displaced drow priest of the Silver Flame who was from Zendrick. Okay, now I've got to work his family in there. I ended up with a Valinor half-elf who wanted to truly prove himself to the ancestors. Now I've got to do stuff with the Valinor and their elven history from where they started in Zendrick. One of my players chose to make a member of I'm not going to remember the name of the house, but it's the house of the animals and all of that. They can craft magical animals and all of that. He made one of them as a druid. All of a sudden, I've got all sorts of intrigue from that house and stuff that's not supposed to be happening that they're doing in Zendrick.
Mm-hmm.
None of that stuff existed until the players told me who their characters were going to be. So if you ask when I am most creative, it's when I know who the characters are going to be that are engaging with this. Because for me, and I know not every GM runs things this way, for me, it's all about the characters and their story in the game. My story that I'm creating with the overarching plot is just so they have cool stuff to hang their stories on.
Oh yeah, I can definitely see that. What ended up being like an emerging theme in the Ravenloft game was the 3 players that I had originally were all playing Fae characters. So we ended up making them all from the Witchlight Carnival, which is kind of like the bright opposite of the Domains of Dread. That was the original 3, but the other ones, when I would ask them, like, do you want to be from somewhere else in the Domains of Dread, or do you want to be from outside that got sucked in? And I keep getting people saying that they want to be from inside the Domains of Dread. So now, like the more they talk about their characters and what they're thinking, like our Dampier wizard, okay, what domain can I find that makes sense for a Dampier wizard that isn't Barovia, where she would have gotten sucked into here from there? So it is interesting because it's bringing in a lot more of this external Ravenloft stuff into things too. And I'm really waiting to get into the weird cosmic horror stuff because that's where my daughter's Goblin's background is. I will say, as far as like other inconvenient times to have ideas, 1, the shower, I know it's cliche, but it actually does happen to me a lot. 2, whenever I am in a meeting at work and I should be paying attention, but it's a 4-hour long meeting, I start having ideas and it makes me very mad.
I used to have that a lot at work when we were in the office, because whatever job I would have, I'd be zoning out to music, maybe a podcast, but all of a sudden an idea would hit me. I could just pop open a Google Doc, start jotting things down while I kept all the stuff I was working on running in the background. I don't do that as much Now that I'm work from home, probably because my boss should not be listening to this, because I can watch documentaries and stuff
Hmm.
on my other monitor while I'm working, so I have
Yeah.
that distracting me.
Since we already kind of touched on that, what do you do to capture your ideas when you have them and you actually have the opportunity to capture them?
I write them down. For me, it's mostly digital. I will occasionally use pen and paper like some ancient traveler through time, but it's rare that I maintain a physical notebook long enough that the ideas make it from that notebook into whatever. Normally I create a folder. I have a My Games folder on my desktop,
Hmm.
and in there I will create a folder for the game, and all notes go into that folder. And in there will be, session 1, and I have all the ideas for session 1 in there, and then I refine them as I go. I've started using Shard's books more with this old Margrave game because, I can have a separate tab that just has
Yeah.
character notes, and I can jot stuff down about things I want to bring up in the future for different characters.
Yeah, I was going to mention that too. I was going to talk about putting things in Google Docs, but if you put things in Google Docs, it's actually pretty easy to upload them into books in Shard.
Mhm.
So I've been doing that a lot, especially, actually, I've done that with both campaigns now, with the Thursday night game and the Chris Lestrade game. So,
I tried doing that with the old Margrave one, but the problem is I'm using the published adventure
yeah,
for Tales of the Old Margrave, and I couldn't figure out how to import chunks of a book into an existing book.
there is a way to do it. I've actually done it a couple times, but I don't know that I can explain it easily.
Yeah, it's fine. I'm enjoying going into I have a copy of the old Margrave adventure that I've named Ange's Tales of the Old Margrave, and I've just edited the crap out of it as I pull out the stuff I don't want. It's like, the character that's sitting there pulling things out of it, tossing it
uh,
over her shoulder, and and then just leaving in the stuff I need and want.
I have like, if I have the right kind of pen that has to be a fine point, and I have a notebook with me, I usually, even like at work, if I have the notebook, I will jot down an idea as quickly as possible because clearly I would not waste time. I will take approximately 15 seconds to write down a to write down an idea that I had. But my problem that I kept having with that is that I would get this big giant notebook, and then I would start another game, and it would seem wrong to take notes for the other game in that same notebook. So then I would get another big giant notebook to take more notes in, and I ended up having like 5 or 6 big giant notebooks that were like a third of the way full because I just couldn't, like, I can't put Star Wars notes in a D&D folder. That's just not right.
See, I have the problem of I want the notebook or the sketchbook, because I do have that artist background. I want it to look perfect.
Mm-hmm.
I want it to look like this is the pure distillation of my creativity. I am not neat enough to do that. And so I invariably end up with, a few pages filled, and then I set it aside because it's too messy. One thing I do use is I have on my phone an app called Color Note, which
Mhm.
is simply a note. It's like you can do text files or lists.
Mm-hmm.
And, like um I have a bunch of notes here I took from when I was getting started with the Margrave campaign, like um awakened animal in risen body of a humanoid can awaken flora and fauna as her representatives. Margrave can resurrect. Prayer to thank for hunted food so it doesn't wake up and walk away. Just these little tidbits of
Mm-hmm.
things from the setting that I thought were cool that I
Yeah.
wanted to note down as I was reading through the book to figure out what this setting was about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and especially in that campaign, there's like little, like, folklorish things in there that really
Yeah.
make it what it is. I will say what I did to solve my I'm going to have a ton of notebooks that are like a third of the way full was I got rocket books. And if you haven't seen those
Ah,
before, those are they have kind of I don't know how to explain. It's not really plastic, it's sort of like it's like a cover over the paper, and
mm-hmm.
you can erase them. Actually, you can wash them off. and it will take the ink back off of them, and you have to have the right kind of pens to do this on them. But I didn't feel bad about writing something in there, because what you can do is there's like a little QR code in the corner, and it just zeroes in. If you have the app, it zeroes in on the page and just, captures the page. Then you can erase it, and you just set up a folder, and they just keep going in there every time you scan one of those pages, and then you can wipe it away, and that folder that notebook can actually be a notebook for multiple types of RPGs, and I don't feel guilty about it.
I think the ultimate message here is figure out the best way for you to write stuff down.
Mm-hmm.
It needs to be recorded somehow, somewhere.
And you need a way to retrieve it.
Yes.
Which brings us to our next topic. How badly scattered have your DM ideas been in the past, and do you have any ideas on how to pull them together again?
So, like I said, I have the My Games folder, which has a folder for each game I'm running, and I try and keep them organized. It's not that easy. I have a backup drive which has all the non-active games in it. And my Eberron one is, let's just say it's a little messy. I try and keep them organized. For like when I did Dragon Heist, I created separate folders for each. It wasn't for each session, it was more for each adventure, that I was giving to the players, however many sessions that actually took. Because sometimes they would just be a session, sometimes they'd take 2 or 3. And then I have them named properly S01 the invitation. And then in there will be the Word doc and all of the pictures and everything else I needed for it. My organization doesn't always work particularly well. The current Margrave folder is, a whole lot of images just tossed in a folder. There's one called Potential Maps. I have one called NPCs, but stuff is all over the place. Hopefully I can find what I need when I need it, but it's not always a guarantee. The longer a campaign goes on, the harder it is to maintain that stuff.
Yes, that is absolutely true. One of the things that I started doing with my Google Docs is if I am prepping something that is likely to be used at a certain date, I will put the date in the title. So that way, if I search for that date, because I can remember what nights we played because it's on the calendar, then I might be able to find the notes that I made for that particular session. I have wonderful folder management skills at the very beginning of a campaign. And then eventually, what my ADHD brain likes to do is kind of like when you shoot a Borg with a phaser several times and they adapt to it. That's my brain trying to do anything productive. We've been way too productive. We need to adapt to this. This is how things won't function anymore. When you are getting all of these ideas together, do you outline your campaign, like not just the next adventure that you're planning, but like the broader long-term scope of the campaign?
No. I should, but I don't. I will sometimes have a blurb somewhere that talks about the ideas of where I want things to go. Stepping away from D&D, I'm going to talk briefly about my Embers Ignited campaign, which is the Savage Worlds Superheroes game. In that one, I have an idea of where I want the campaign to go. Therefore, I have a blurb that I have written about the goals I have for where I want the campaign to go, but I don't have an outline. Mostly because by the time stuff hits the players, it starts changing enough that I don't find the outline to be useful.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I had a particular plan for one NPC that they engaged with. That has kind of changed as they've interacted with her.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still going to use part of that plan, but if I had outlined stuff, I probably would have had to scrap most of the outline. So I just have like a few sentences saying my kind of elevator pitch for that idea that I can then enhance and develop when it gets to the point where I actually need to pull that into the game. That's actually how a lot of my prep work goes,
Mm-hmm.
is I have the elevator pitch for what I want to have happen, And then basically when it gets close to the time that I need to pull on those particular ideas, then I finesse them into something larger and stronger and more robust that I can actually put in front of the players.
I do outline campaigns. You are correct. Sometimes you do get to the point where you're like, this isn't going that direction anymore. But what I tend to do is I will have the very beginning of the campaign, like the first few adventures, I will maybe follow a little bit more specifically. And when I say that, I don't mean that the players have to do these things. Early in the campaigns, there's usually a lot of things that I do where it's like, they can choose between these three things, you know, that sort of thing to get a feel for what they're going to gravitate towards and what they're going to like. So I have the early part a little bit more sketched out. I have somewhere vaguely over here, as the campaign is wrapping up, I want this to be the final villain. This seems to be a good villain for the type of characters they've made, and if they change over time, I will adapt it, but I want to kind of keep the core of what that villain is. But in between, I usually have very vague things like I will have like brackets in part of the outline that says, this is when the PCs start to get famous. What do they get famous for? I don't know. But the point is that's going to be when people start like recognizing them and showing up, and that's going to give the opportunity for, like people to know them better than they know the people that are, coming to them asking for help.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that I kind of do with these outlines as they get a little bit more detailed is I don't always manage to do it, but I try to have kind of a conclusion for each tier of play where there's like an arc, and this is like, if we stopped playing at the end of this tier, then we're done. And I think we kind of managed that with 5th and 11th level both.
Yeah, I think we have. I don't think I have done that. I do know I try to, I don't base it on the tiers, I base it on when we are pausing campaigns. Like the Zendrick game, they successfully dealt with a whole bunch of things and were able to find a location for the refugees to settle in Zendrick where they could basically develop a relationship with the turtle village they stumbled across. And that became a good pause point for the campaign to say, we've completed this season. And then when we pick up, I'll probably time jump to them being back in Stormreach and continue on. I am not picking that game back up anytime soon because I am already running the old Margrave game on the alternate Saturday, and I do not want to be running 2 games at the same time, even if I enjoy both campaigns. I'm already running too many games. I think I have 4 active campaigns I'm running.
That is so many games.
The week they were all happening at once, I'm like, what did I do to myself? They're spaced out a little better right now because there's the Coyote and Crow game, which is every other Thursday, which was the Coriolis game, but we're now Coyote and Crow. There's Tales of the Old Margrave, which is every other Saturday. I'm doing Savage Worlds East Texas University on every other Sunday, but on opposite weekends from Old Margrave. And then I have the once a month game of Embers Ignited, which is happening next week, but then we don't get to play again until the first week of June. Because scheduling is the biggest villain of any role-playing game.
And they're legendary monsters.
They are.
They get to attack when it's not your turn.
So many legendary actions.
Speaking of that idea, though, of knowing, kind of who your villains are going to be, but then changing things as play develops. In that same Star Wars campaign that we were running, I had this idea where, vaguely speaking, one side, one group was kind of running into an Imperial, an ISB agent that was going to be blackmailing them as kind of the main villain at the end of it. Because this was scum and villainy, so these are people that are doing unsavory jobs, maybe not evil things, just swashbucklery, smuggler type things. One group was going to, clash with a Hutt. The other group was going to clash with this ISB agent. But in the middle, we had a player who admittedly started enjoying murdering people with his Wookiee just a little bit too much. And he admitted, like, I don't know what to do with this character because I have made him too bloodthirsty and everyone else in the group is afraid of him. So I kind of want to retire him. He went to jail for just like ripping people's arms off randomly. Well, what we did at the end of the campaign was I asked him, I said, is this okay? Because you're in jail, but this is an ISB agent. He can get people out of jail. So the ISB agent was the villain, but the person they fought at the end of that campaign was the Wookiee.
I've never had it taken that far, and usually it ends up being the player isn't quite as aware of their situation, but I have been in games where people are taking their characters down paths where I'm like, if you continue down this path, you are going to be at odds with the other PCs, and you will probably become an NPC.
Yeah.
Do you want to go down that path? Because I am happy to do that and make your character an NPC while you make another character.
We kind of had that discussion at some point where it was like, he really was getting into the whole, I am a mercenary that is doing, illegal work. And we had a session where we kind of sat down and we were like, nobody's really mad, but also we kind of don't want you ripping the heads off of people that we capture that we're turning in for a bounty. We kind of had that discussion about how when you're playing a scoundrel in Star Wars, you're not playing a really sleazy, dangerous, nasty criminal. You're playing somebody like Han Solo. You're playing someone like Lando. That's what we're shooting for here.
Yeah. I was in a game once. It was a superhero game, so veering away from D&D again, but the other player was playing an Electra-type assassin character who was going after the mob, but she was being very, very brutal about it. I was playing a cop in a battle suit. And I'm like, I have to arrest you. You assaulted that man and then broke into his premises without a warrant. I have to arrest you. This is not me trying to be a goody two-shoes paladin. It's like, you crossed a line. You made the other character with you run away because you used your powers to make that man bleed and then heal him so he would talk. So,
yeah.
No, you crossed a line. And the campaign kind of fizzled not too long after that, but we had to have a conversation about how do we do this? Because your character is getting arrested for what they have done. Where do we go from here?
You mentioned Electra, and then I'm sitting here thinking, like, this is when you have the talk about how, can we make this 25% less Frank Miller? That's
I think her description of the character was Electra in mom jeans.
So we're talking about having a lot of different ideas. Do ideas that you're for a campaign that you're creating from scratch, do those occur to you differently than when you're running a published game because you have that point of comparison at this point? Or, do you only get ideas for one or the other? How does that process work differently between those two?
I think for me, the process works differently based on how much material I'm working with to start with. I still do a lot of finessing and changing of published content to fit the game I'm running for my players. But I find I struggle more trying to make sure that I'm keeping the pieces in play that need to be in play for future parts of it.
Yeah.
Very few adventures survive contact with the players without changing.
Mm-hmm.
And the issue you run into with a pre-written adventure series is that chapter 4 is expecting the players to go down certain paths, and if your players don't go down those paths, it sometimes can feel very ham-fisted to try and get them back into position where you can use the material in chapter 4 for your players.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a different kind of work than when you're running things from scratch. When I ran the Zendrick game was all me. That was everything I was doing was from scratch, just using the source material that was created for Eberron to know like different NPCs, different things in the world that I could pull on for the adventures I was writing. In that one, you end up with different problems because I was not planning things too far out. I was maybe like 1 or 2 adventures ahead, and those 1 or 2 adventures ahead were rough outlines. I didn't have things in stone until the players were there. Sometimes it would be, oh, that's a really cool map. I need to do something with that and do it that way. Whereas running a pre-written adventure, I'm much more concerned about like, okay, if this is the next step, how do I get them from here to there and make it seem like it's all one fluid game? That's what I ran into with the Honey Queen adventure. I don't like the hooks that the Honey Queen adventure is set up with.
Mm-hmm.
It's much more mercenary, much more, you're expected to invade this hive just to get some stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, my players aren't going to do that. I mean, they don't do the murder hobo thing. They're not going to go breaking and entering into somebody's house to steal things from them just because they're hired to do it. So I had to come up with other reasons and motivations for them to go to this location and explore it and still get the same vibe of the place without it being a mercenary. You were hired to go get this thing. You have to go get it.
I think when it comes to published adventures versus stuff that I am like a campaign that I'm just doing from scratch, I am more likely to have ideas that take bigger swings when I'm running my own thing. For example, when I was running 7th Sea and the players were all members of Die Cruisritter, which is a monster hunting organization, I decided I was going to have this whole arc that I was intentionally making based on the Brotherhood of the Wolf, except that the twist was, hey, this thing is actually, a werewolf that's, The whole point was, I didn't mind if they figured it out, but I just didn't want it to be blatant, this is what I'm doing.
Yeah.
I wouldn't try that in a published adventure because that would take too much away from whatever theme the adventure already has going. But in my own game, I can, I will sit here and go, I am totally going to find a picture of Monica Bellucci from a different movie and say that the NPC looks like this.
I've run into issues with published adventures. You know this because you were playing in it, where the expectations of the people writing the adventure didn't line up with what my characters would engage with.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a struggle to figure out the motivations to keep the players moving.
Yeah.
For example, they're trying to get through a treacherous area to get from point A to point B to find the cultists who have been doing bad things and kidnapping people.
Mm-hmm.
Along the way, there is this village they can run across. And the village is ruled by this pompous, arrogant, evil woman. And the way the adventure was written is they could either go murder somebody from her to get the information from her, or just go to the person that was going to be murdered and get the information from them. And I'm like, especially considering we got to this part of the adventure in November of 2024, there was no way my players were going to leave an arrogant, aristocratic, abusive leader in a position of power if they had anything to say about it. And I'm sure the people who wrote the adventure just assumed the players would like either ignore her or do it anyway. And I'm like, no, they're not going to leave her behind. Her people are starving to death. They're emaciated. They're in poor condition. She's obviously being abusive. They're going to engage with this in a way the adventure does not expect them to.
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, just from my character's perspective, he's a doctor that was doing volunteer work on, like, war-torn world. His whole life is just not letting suffering happen. There's no way that this encounter is just going to roll along and get past him.
We wrapped everything up in a nice little bow for that adventure, but I stopped running it because there were things further ahead that were going to be the exact same problem, where the adventure was written with a certain idea and didn't really align with the morality of the characters that were in the game.
Honestly, it is a problem that I see also a lot with games that are set in the Underdark in D&D, where they want you to infiltrate a Drow city or a Durgar city, and then you're walking through the city and seeing people being tortured or, enslaved or all of this, and it's like, just ignore it. You have a bigger goal, and it's like,
Yeah, yeah. I will say, Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous, the video game, did this relatively well in the section where you end up in, I don't know, it's extra planar, there's demons or devils there. I don't remember which. It's a Pathfinder setting thing, but it is a plane that is full of these creatures, and there's a lot of bad stuff going on. It's a video game, and the constraints of a video game are different than the constraints of an RPG tabletop game. So they can kind of keep you in the bumper bowling zone a little better. But still, they understood that players were going to not want to deal with certain things. So there is a point where you can just, okay, you fight everything in the marketplace. And if you survive, it earns you enough respect that you can continue walking around without being just attacked.
Yeah.
So
the other thing I was going to say about published adventures is I tend to get ideas that are more modular. Like, I can drop it in, but it's not going to be a major, distraction or side road from things like it. For example, for my Curse of Strahd game, Liz, if you're listening to this, you're not hearing this, but like watching Castlevania, seeing a big, loud, comically crude vampire that is basically a Viking, I kind of want to use him somewhere in Curse of Strahd. And I love that character, but he's not going to be a major character. He's just going to be kind of a one-off thing so that they can run into this guy that is like the exact opposite of Strahd. He is not refined. He is not dignified. He's just kind of a very crude jerk.
Unless the players adopt him.
Right.
And want to keep him around forever.
And also, I'm going to paint myself into a corner because that character was voiced by Peter Stormare. So I'm going to have to watch a whole bunch of things with Peter Stormare and try and do his accent, which will go horribly, but I'll still try it anyway. When do you know it's time to just let an idea go because it's not going to fit in the campaign? No matter how many good ideas you have, you can't fit that square peg into a round hole.
Yeah, sometimes the campaign just moves past it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not talking of mechanically moves past, throwing a particular creature against them. That can happen. But more, it's just they've moved beyond a place where it would be a good idea to fit that into the campaign.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to have them run up a ghost ship of dwarves if they've left the high seas behind and are now on land. The time has passed for that idea.
Don't you want to go back out on the ocean just one more time? Why?
Not after what you did to us there.
It's okay. You only have to sail back home after all of this, so it should be fine. So my example of this, like when you get to the end of a campaign, even if you've been building up to that big villain, there are times that big villain, it's not so much you want to get rid of the big villain, and we talked about this with the big bad evil guy thing when we had that discussion, but there are times when the campaign just feels like you've already hit the peak. So maybe you just describe a way for that villain to go down that isn't that big major scene that you originally had planned for them. And I am going to use an example if the Lord of the Rings were actually an RPG campaign, which Matt Colville did, so I can do it. Also, if you would like to give us Matt Colville money on the Patreon, please do.
I mean, I'm not going to say no.
But if you look at, like, if the Lord of the Rings were an RPG campaign, and let's say the GM had this idea that the end fight is going to be with Sauron. Like, maybe they destroy the ring and it weakens him, but there's still going to be this epic fight between Aragorn and Sauron because Aragorn is the true king returned at last, and that was going to be the end. But then you have this great moment with Eowyn when she kills the Witch King, and that's your big fight moment. And then you have the two PCs that were throwing the ring into Mount Doom, and Gollum bites the finger off of one of them. Sorry, spoilers for Lord of the Rings. And but like after those things happen, it's like I don't think it's time to have him show up. I think this is just over. I think he just lost, you
have to be agile with your campaign. I always worry about the people I hear who've they've spent years developing a campaign to give to their players. I'm sure it's lovely.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's lovely, but you have to be able to adapt and adjust and change to fit what the players are doing. And of course, this is game style. Jared and I are definitely both players who lean into the story of the characters.
Mm-hmm.
Other GMs don't. They have their world, and you can come play in it, but it's not going to change for the characters. The characters have to, like, deal with the world.
Yeah. How are you going to fit into the scenario that already exists?
That's not a game I would necessarily enjoy, because I want my character to be, and it's not saying I have main character syndrome, but it's more, I want my character to be a main character in the story of that game.
Right.
It requires being agile and being able to adapt things to fit the needs of the story the players are helping you create.
The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, or the one. That also brings up another idea that we could use for a different topic, which is incorporating player ideas into your campaign planning.
Yeah, that could definitely be an interesting topic, because as I have said, even in this episode, I am very polygamous. There are a lot of different games I play. I actually struggle with some of the more indie games where you are supposed to source ideas at the table.
Yeah.
I don't like it. And this isn't to mean I'm not tailoring games to suit the players and what the players are bringing to the table. I just find treating the players as secondary GMs doesn't work for me.
Yeah. And I have had a lot of players that are not comfortable in that role when they are playing. They are great improvisers. They are not people that want to contribute to the meta narrative.
Oh, we can do that topic, and I can totally talk about the original Eberron game and them getting back from Argonassen, and how one player just shut down everything that was happening in their narrative because he didn't like where it was going.
I think we've used up all of our ideas on this topic, and we captured them on this podcast.
Now let's join Ange and Jared for some downtime research, where they do the work so we don't have to.
Every episode, we're going to look for something related to D&D that we want to pass along to you, our listeners. It might be products, websites, videos, or podcasts, but it will always be something that we think will enhance your D&D experience. First, though, our Eldritch Invocation. We have a Patreon now, so if you would like to help us do this show and provide some additional content for you, we would love it if you would decide to join. We've got our own Discord, and we'll be releasing additional material, like a lot of the things Chris has already released for the Heroes of Havel's Way. You can find that at patreon.com/Thac0WA.
Remember, we're okay with Matt Colville levels of money. We can handle it.
Oh, from me, this week. It will, by the time this episode drops, Dragon Week will be done. But currently, Dragon Week is happening on YouTube. It is a bunch of content creators doing monster-themed video content, specifically about dragons. Ginny D has one. Hers was the first one I saw this week, which was a video about how, yeah, sure, it's great to fight dragons, but I want to pet one. And how to have some dragons in your games that are not just there to eat the players, the characters. The other one I saw today was really cool from the Dungeon Dudes, which was basically them noodling out the idea of a warlock with a pact of the dragon and how they would build that. It's a very cool idea, and there's a whole bunch of other creators out there. We'll have a link if they have the playlist out. I will drop a link to that in our show notes. Otherwise, just go find Ginny D. She'll lead you to it. She's the Pied Piper of gaming anyway.
I don't know, having a pet dragon in a campaign, I wonder what that would be like. Normally, I like finding like weird, quirky things that are going to, spark your imagination that are fantasy related, but I keep running into things that feel more like news, and I still feel like sharing them because they're kind of important. Thankfully, no one else is retired from Wizards of the Coast this week, so that's good. But the D&D 5.2 SRD has just been released. So now all of the third-party people that have been kind of waiting to see how far they can push the envelope to make their content look more compatible with 2024 do not have to worry about that near as much. because things like weapon masteries are expressly now in Creative Commons for them to use. So we're going to put a link to the 5.2 SRD in the show notes. The other thing that was kind of interesting is they've said that they are going to be updating this with errata as it comes out too.
I'm particularly intrigued by the fact that they called it 5.2. Does this mean we can start calling it 5.2 D&D instead of 2024 D&D? I know that's not what they want, but can I do it? Can I still do it?
But then if they release another errata, does that mean we have to start calling it 5.21?
I don't know. I work in tech. That happens all the time.
We are happily part of the Polygamers Podcast Network, helping you run and play your best games. We think you'll enjoy another Polygamers podcast like
Pandas Talking Games, where gamers talking about tabletop role-playing games and making outtakes. Join Pandas Phil and Senda every other Wednesday, answering listener questions about playing, running, and designing TTRPGs. It's like Car Talk, but for games.
We have used up all our resources, so I think it's time for a long rest. I hope this adventure was rewarding for you, and we hope you'll go exploring with us when we start our next adventure.